staying with us. Let's straight away go across to K Subramanian, India's Chief Economic Advisor, joining us right now in a special conversation. Mr. Subramanian, your economic survey actually gave us a big hint on which way the government's budget may be headed as far as fiscal deficit is concerned. Government's decision to spend more, to borrow more and spend more to revive the economy and keep the other constraints or concerns aside. But how do we come to this decision? How did the government arrive at the decision that it's okay to reach a 6.8% barrier as well while we spend and try and revive the economy?
Firstly, Tanvi, I must make sure that I give credit for implementing these to the Honorable Finance Minister and the entire team of the Ministry of Finance, who are the ones that eventually take these decisions. As for the logic for this, if you would recall, the second chapter of the economic survey this year had focused on elucidating the need for counter-cyclical fiscal policy and showing that fiscal multipliers, which are essentially the return that you get when the fisc, invests 1 rupee into the economy, what is the multiplier that it gets? What is the return it gets? These fiscal multipliers are much higher during a recessionary period than they are during normal periods, and therefore any investment that is made by the government during times like these ends up effectively self-financing within a few years. So the logic was that. Also the fact that if you look at India's GDP growth rate, that has been by norm higher than the interest rate that the government pays. So these were all the considerations that led to the budget. But the key point actually is I wouldn't say that the key focus is on fiscal deficit. The key focus is on growth, and in that sense, this this budget is a dream budget because firstly, not only does it enable the recovery that is underway in the economy, but it also lays out a very solid foundation for growth in this decade. Do remember that this is the first budget of this decade, and by investing in infrastructure, both hard and soft. I think about health as part of the soft infrastructure. If you take into account labor and capital, the financial sector reforms that have been announced in the budget, when you put all of it together, the foundation for high growth exceeding 8% in a couple of years has been laid through this budget. So it is really a dream budget that is growth focused.
So let me ask you this, and you're right. Of course, the focus is more about growth right now. What I was trying to understand was, where do you decide that, okay, this much we're ready to break the barriers to ensure growth? This is the cost we're ready to accept and bear. But many critics and experts have said that even when it comes to growth and the spending that has been announced, it's just a financial jugglery and redoing of the math. For example, in healthcare, while it does look like a great figure when you say 2.2 lakh crore rupees, this includes water and sanitation, this includes the vaccine spending, which would have been any which ways there. This includes your Jal Jeevan mission, your finance grants. So effectively, it's not 135% growth, but much lesser to 30%.
Tanvi, I think you have to keep in mind that when you think about healthcare includes prevention and cure.
Yes.
And healthcare also, if you look at in terms of the value chain, you have primary, secondary, and tertiary. When an economy spends on good water, on sanitation, these are actually important investments from the perspective of prevention of disease, and therefore, in fact, the return from such spending is even greater than spending that happens on curative healthcare. So, in that sense, I would say that it actually is a good thing that the that the investment has been provided for drinking water through the Jal Jeevan Mission, for sanitation, the Swachh Bharat program, urban Swachh Bharat program. These are all essential parts of healthcare. Sometimes we make the mistake of thinking about healthcare as only curative, but prevention is always better than cure. So in that sense, I think these are actually really tangible. Aspects of healthcare that have been focused on. And secondly, this point that healthcare, that vaccination would have been anywhere there, I think is in some sense, after the event, when the money has been spent, then saying anywhere it would have been there. I do recall, just yesterday when I was being, people were questioning me. They were asking me, oh, is there going to be a big budget for
COVID
vaccination?
says, yes. Yes.
How can we move the targets actually just within less than 24 hours? I think,
Yeah.
that is something that sometimes surprises me. That said, I must also mention that the spending for vaccination is extremely important. It's a vaccine for the economy as well, because it can really enable the contact sensitive service sectors. There's a lot of pent up demand that is waiting to unleash,
Okay.
and that can happen through vaccination. So the 35,000 crores there actually is money well spent.
Mr. Subramanian, I mean, for a second, if you can, I mean, if you can wear your economist hat and not your government advisor hat, I have a very specific question for you. There is no doubt about the fact that the...
Let me correct first that I actually always wear the economist hat.
All right.
Terrific. This insinuation is something that actually let me very, very, at the outset, rule it out.
Okay, great. So the question is very simple. Look, it's absolutely, there is no doubt about this, that the government's efforts to invest in hard capital infrastructure, as you would put it, is extremely laudable. But does it worry you that in India, typically, once post the allocation, there are enormous hurdles that come in the way, whether it's land acquisition, whether it is for regulatory issues in states, whether it is environmental issues, whether it is simple politics that sometimes state governments indulge in, which slows down the process of the investment actually reaching to the intended beneficiary at the speed at which they should. So while the amounts are great and the investment is in the right direction, the efficacy of the speed at which this will become trickled down, does that worry you? Because there is a big danger of that not happening so soon as you would want to.
This again is an example of moving targets. Yesterday, if somebody had told you that, this is the amount of spending that is going to be done, which is the necessary condition, by the way, and the implementation is a sufficient condition. Yesterday, people were clamoring for the necessary condition to be fulfilled. Now that the necessary condition is fulfilled, I guess it is an aspect of dil mange more, and I actually am as impatient as everybody else. But I do think that, if in terms of the credibility and the honesty with which the arithmetic for the budget has been provided.
Yeah.
For instance, the economic survey had actually projected a growth of 11% in real terms. The budget only takes 10.5%. Of which I must point out that the 2.5% of GDP spending in infrastructure, which typically creates a multiplier effect in that year itself. And an NIPFP study shows that 1 rupee invested in infrastructure brings about 2.5 rupees in the same year. So I think that is critical to. So the 2.5% GDP of GDP on infrastructure has the potential to generate 6%. So that tells you that the 11% projection for economic growth is definitely achievable. If you take those and then project the tax revenues, I think they're very credible. Similarly, the non-tax estimate of 1.75 lakh crores is also an underestimate in my opinion, because the proceeds that would come from disinvestment of the two public sector banks and the insurance company has not been taken into account in this. So when you take all of this, I think if you make credible estimates, then the ability to implement this, it is far greater than if you actually don't make credible estimates. So this is a case of under-promising and what is likely to be over-delivering.
Okay, Mr. Subramanian, I'm sure there are lots who disagree on the under-promising or over-promising when it comes to the divestment target or even when it comes to the tax collections. But I guess it's too soon to really debate that. We'd rather wait and watch to see how this year pans out and how the economy revives.
Let me clarify why I make that. let me give you the arguments why I say that. The increase in the tax revenues has been projected at about 16.7%. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, as I said, 11% GDP growth, not only the infrastructure, but the V-shaped recovery that is happening. So 11% real terms, I think is definitely achievable, which let's translates into 15.5% nominal.
Yes.
Typically, tax buoyancy of 1.2 is something that is on average is achievable. Now, if you take into account the way in which GST has been improving because of several measures on compliance, that 1.2 takes tax buoyancy is definitely achievable. So if you take 15.5 multiplied by 1.2, you get about 18.5% as the projected increase in tax revenue. And yet what has actually been projected is 16.7%. I hope now you see, actually, as they say in Hindi, दूध का दूध पानी का पानी हो गया in terms of what is the credibility of the tax revenue project.
All right, I'm going to give you that one, Mr. Subramanian. I wish we had more time, but thank you so much for joining us and really helping us break it down and understanding what the government's perspective is when it comes to these big issues. Thank you so much.